In today's conversation, we're exploring how trust architects take a protocol over platform approach and why that's critical to building interoperable and scalable designs. So, with that, we're thrilled to be joined by Pix CEO Zach Zeus, who will share his insights and perspective. Let's get started.
Uh, Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. Yeah, as Dan mentioned, I'm going to be talking about what does protocol over platform really mean, and what does that mean, and what are the benefits to our trust architecture community. And we talk about protocol over platform in the context of the United Nations Transparency Protocol as a key feature of the approach and methodology to address transparency, traceability, and trust. Um, Because this is a protocol-based session, I'm going to do a bit of an intro, about 5 to 7 minutes. The focus of today's conversation is much more on the technical side of the United Nations Transparency Protocol and trust architecture. I then will cover a little bit on the business side and policy standards side. From a trust architecture perspective, we always talk about technology, business, and policy, and how they coalesce to architect trust in global trade. And so these three components we think are necessary to address the challenges in addressing the challenges that businesses and organizations and communities are facing as they try and navigate an increasingly complex world. The core focus today is on the United Nations Transparency Protocol, which is which is one of the things that the PIX team has been focused on designing and building out. And we're describing how the Transparency Protocol really is, what the benefits are ahead of, on top of platforms, or in addition to platforms. So one of the challenges that people face is there's too many traceability platforms. Which do I choose? And what we often say is choose any that conforms to the United Nations Transparency Protocol. Pick any that follow the protocol. And the second thing people struggle with is there's a mountains of standards and regulations to make sense of. And how do we build a simple vocabulary to allow easy classification and aggregation? The United Nations Transparency Protocol describes how to do that. I'm not comfortable sharing sensitive information. The protocol also describes how you're empowered to share only what delivers material value. And this all seems too complex and expensive. Who's paying? The United Nations Transparency Protocol is simple and cheap to implement. And so part of the whole idea here is really trying to address the big challenges that folks are facing in addressing transparency at scale, and providing a consistent, repeatable, scalable model that allows folks to address that. And that consistent, repeatable, scalable model is how we describe the United Nations Transparency Protocol. And the whole point is to go from a few hard work pilots. So there are lots of implementations and demonstrations of supply chain transparency, and what they hit up, the wall they hit is that you can do that when you get everybody to agree to put all of the data into a single platform, but that doesn't scale past the boundaries of that platform. And so in order to scale past this few hard work pilots to global adoption at scale is what we describe, what is the UNTP Transparency Protocol. And in this session, I'm going to really go into what we mean by the protocol as compared to a platform. So what does it mean to choose a protocol over a platform? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So first, we're going to do some definitions. What do we mean when we say protocol? What do we mean when we say platform? So I've grabbed these definitions from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. A protocol is a set of conventions governing the treatment and especially the formatting of data in an electronic communications system. The key word there that I've highlighted is conventions. And so what we're going to talk about today are the conventions that make up the United Nations Transparency Protocol. A platform is an application or website that serves as a base from which a service is provided. And so the key thing here is it's a service is typically is the provisioning of a service to a customer or user or business is what the platform is focused on. And so what we're going to talk about is how platforms and protocols interact, and what when we say protocol over platform, what we're really trying to address. So the core of UNTP is this idea of simplifying the data exchange between buyers and sellers. The main vector for that is a digital product passport, or if we're talking about the facilities that a product is built at, a digital facility record. We'll talk more about those when we get into the technical session. But the protocol is really designed to simplify and standardize the exchange of data between a supplier who's selling a product and a supplier who's building products at a facility and the buyer of that product. And the protocol is designed to simplify that. And what we sort of often think about is so the protocol is about the exchange between the buyer and supplier, and platforms also exist. So it's not that we're saying protocol, not platform. We're talking about the protocol on top of the platform. Platforms exist and they deliver tremendous value to businesses, but supply chain traceability is a unique case because trying to connect data across many businesses and different industries, for example, leather from an Australian farm ending up in European cars, means that no single system will be able to fully answer the full traceability question. And so no platform is going to be able to answer the full transparency at scale challenge. One of the things we like to suggest folks to do is do a thought experiment. So if a single US platform started to dominate trade, like a Facebook of trade, right? Facebook dominated social interactions a few years ago. Asian economies would look to have a regional platform. In fact, in the Facebook example that we used, a lot of Asian countries did build their own social ecosystem. Now, one of the things we know about trade is that it does go over regional borders, right? So we buy cars from Asia, we sell things to Asia. Like there's trade back and forth between economies, and so once you have more than one platform, you need to have, in order for them to communicate, there needs to be an interoperability protocol, and that's what the UNTP is designed to set. Is to make, and one of the things we also like to say is once you do have an interoperability protocol that is scalable. Then platforms can be built to the platforms can be right-sized to the value that they're delivering for their community, their businesses, the ecosystem, and the data can be moved beyond the boundaries of that platform using the interoperability protocol. So we can build smaller, more higher value systems and use the interoperability protocol to create the interface. So this is the architecture of the United Nations Transparency Protocol. And there's 5 components here: the secure the data, find the data, the actual data itself, understanding the data, and valuing the data. I'm going to go into this. You're going to see this picture over and over again as we go through the technical part of the discussion. The key thing to sort of understand here is that the United Nations Transparency Protocol is the supporting instrument for Recommendation 49. And Recommendation 49 was approved by consensus at the UNECE plenary by all of the heads of delegation last month. And so Recommendation 49 is a recommendation document, recommendation to nations document, and UNTP is the implementation guidance of that policy recommendation. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the conversation when we get into the policy section of the talk. So what we're going to talk about now are what are the conventions. When we looked at the definition of a protocol, it was the conventions that make data easier to understand and I don't remember actually what we said the definition was, but the protocol was a set of conventions governing the treatment and especially the formatting of data in an electronic communication system. So what we're going to answer now are what are those conventions that make up the United Nations Transparency Protocol? What are they specifically? How do we know we're meeting them? And that's what we want to kind of walk through in the next slide. And as we do each time, we're going to talk about the technology component, the business component, and the policy component. And today, because we're talking primarily about technical conventions associated with the protocol, we're going to start with the technology conventions. So the technology conventions of the United Nations Transparency Protocol there's about 8 of them. And we're going to start with the verifiable credentials profile. So on the right-hand side, there's the diagram of the United Nations Transparency Protocol architecture. And one of the components in there under the secure the data element is the verifiable credentials profile. And there are 10 business requirements, and the different components have different musts and should that means that which is how you know you're following the protocol. If it's a must, it is not negotiable. You have to do it. Otherwise, you will not compliant with the protocol. If it's a must, if it's a should, then you should do it. If it's a may, this is pretty obvious. But these descriptions are normative, and so they are building the rules of the protocol. And the link I have down here is actually the specifications for this component. So if we go into that, we could, let me make that bigger for folks. This is the verifiable credentials profile. These are the requirements, and we can see the musts and shoulds in here. And so the VCD, the verifiable credential profile, must implement the W3C VCDM 2.0 JSON LD compacted document form, right? That's a must. That's a requirement of the protocol. If you don't do that, then you will not be compliant with the protocol. Did methods, render methods, presentation. So this actually makes up a big component of the technical underpinning of the protocol. So these standards and components, the W3C VC data model version 2.0, that's verifiable credentials. The did method, W3C did standard is listed here. That's one of the components. These make up kind of the technical underpinnings of the protocol. The next one that I want to talk about is the digital product passport credential. So one of the things, there's 13 business requirements, 6 musts and 4 shoulds, and 5 musts and 6 shoulds on the implementation guidance. So as I talked about when I was describing the protocol, the digital product passport is a key data carrier about products that are shared between supplier and buyer. And the simplification of the data exchange, how we make that happen is via the digital product passport. And so the image I have here talks about the who, what, where, and the claims that are being made in the product passport. And if we look at the standard of the digital product passport and look at the overview, the conceptual model, the requirements, one of the key requirements is that it uses all DPPs are issued as W3C verifiable credentials and must conform to VCDM 2.0. One of the things that I think, as I looked through this in preparation for this presentation, is we probably will want to clean this up and say must use the digital the verifiable credentials, the VCP profile that we were talking about in the last slide, just so that it's more consistently defined as we move across that. But one of the things about the UNTP protocol is that each of these data elements are issued as verifiable credentials following the verifiable credential profile defined in this box. And so that's how we're going. That's how the technical aspects of this start to hang together. Digital facility record, same pattern. And again, we can look at it here. We can see the requirements, the logical model, and the musts and shoulds in here. And all of these things are built on top of the verifiable credentials profile for the facility that the product is made at. Digital traceability event. This one gets a little bit more involved. There's 7 business requirements, but underneath the digital traceability event, there's actually 6 additional sort of sub-events of a digital traceability event, which is the object, transformation, traceability, association, aggregation, transaction. And that's how you build the traceability picture about the manufacturing process of a product. So for example, if we're describing how we make a product passport for a laptop, we might have an aggregation event that effectively becomes the hardware bill of materials. So the aggregation event would list all of the components that made up that product, the product that is listed in the product passport that has the traceability event attached to it. And so the product passport would say, hey, I'm a laptop, and I have a transformation event where I put together a laptop case, a keyboard, a screen, a battery, a processor into this laptop. And so the traceability event would sit underneath the product passport and describe what the product is made out of. And this link takes you to the specific musts and shoulds associated with building out a traceability event. Digital conformity credentials. This is, I'm pointing at the wrong thing in my diagram, but it's pointed at the conformity credential. And so a conformity credential is a attestation about the claims that you're making in a product passport. And so if I say that my laptop is the best laptop is the greenest laptop in the world, the digital conformity credential would be a third party, might be a third party attestation that proves that my claim about it being the greenest laptop in the world is true. And so a digital conformity credential would be attached to the product passport or the facility record that describes the attestation that provides proof of the claims that I'm making about my products or my facilities. And it's following an additional business requirements specification that's been built out by an international group of conformity experts around how digital conformity credentials can be digitized. Identity resolution. So one of the challenges when you sort of are building out these product passports is, how do people find them? So if I have a product, how do I help people find information about that product? And the key idea here is that if I have the identity of a thing, I can find more information about that thing. And so one of the things that we're trying to help businesses avoid is having a different many different QR codes on a product talking about the different things. So one of the challenges that people face is they having lots of different QR codes, people don't know which one to scan. And so an identity resolver gives us the ability to have one place to go to find out all of the information about the product. So that identity resolution service might have the product passport. It might have a link to that product passport in multiple different languages, or might have different versions of that product passport for market access reasons. It might have additional data like the conformity credentials about the product or the facility. That identity resolver gives us the ability to find out more information about the thing. Yeah, so it gives you the ability to find more information about the item. And the key idea here is, in some cases, the identity of the thing is well known, like in retail situations where it's a barcode. But in other parts of the supply chain, one example is in Australian agriculture, an animal identifier is not a barcode. It's actually an RFID that's placed in the animal's ear. And so the identity resolution capability means that regardless of the different identity scheme, you can attach high quality information to that product as it moves through the value chain. This is also a key capability for helping low maturity steps in a value chain, helping the data move across low maturity steps. So if a cow goes to a sale yard or a steer goes to a sale yard to be sold to a feedlot, for example, that sale yard might not have any might not add any information to the animal from a digital perspective. It's just a trading post. But because the product passport about where the animal was raised and maybe its deforestation status was attached to the animal itself, not to via the identity, the RFID in the ear, then when it does get to the feedlot, the new owner can scan that RFID, hit the identity resolution service, and get more information about that animal. One of the other sort of key technical elements is this idea of a digital identity anchor. And what this sort of articulates is how does the well-known identifier, so that NLSID, in the cow's ear, how does the person who is attaching a product passport about that identity get identified and be able to attach that information? And we do that through the digital identity anchor. And actually, this was realized that it was so important beyond just the scope of the United Nations Transparency Protocol that an additional UNCFACT, a new UNCFACT project called the Global Trust Registry Project, is taking the concepts that are in this business requirements section and this definition and expanding it out into a wholly independent project to really facilitate adoption of the digital identity anchor and that kind of capability into the global marketplace. Because the key idea here is there are lots of natural identity registers. There's business registers all over the world, and a digital identity. This Global Trust Registry project is sort of a registry of registers that allow folks who are already doing the business process of recognizing businesses or places or things, and giving them a consistent way of doing that internationally, because it has even more applicability beyond just the United Nations Transparency Protocol. The decentralized access control, one of the key things is if I'm publishing data about my products, how do I secure it? So basically, there's the decentralized access control gives a number of techniques and requirements around how data can be shared securely. And so 9 business requirements there, bunch of musts and shoulds, and that's built out in this section. And then the final one is, how do I understand the data that's in these product passports? And the key way to do that is via the sustainability vocabulary catalog. And so this is how information in a product passport or facility record is able to be linked to the conformity credential. So when I say, this is the greenest laptop in the world, and I have an auditor validate my claims, I can actually link the validation to the specific claims that I've made in my product passport or facility. And so the sustainability vocabulary catalog has 10 musts and 4 shoulds, and they're describing via the discoverability, resolvability, and verifiability. So those are all the technical conventions associated with the United Nations Transparency Protocol. I'm now going to go onto the business side, building out the business case associated with implementing the UNTP, United Nations Transparency Protocol, and talking about the conventions that are built into UNTP from a business perspective. And there are 3 of those. There are 3 components to valuing the data associated with implementing United Nations Transparency Protocol. And they are the business case template, the community activation program, and the value assessment framework. And the value assessment framework is really focused on building out the feedback loops for UNCFACT to know how effectively UNTP is working. And the key idea of the value assessment framework is the number of UNTP compliant credentials issued, the number of extensions, and the overall impact to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'm going to talk about the other two, the business case template and the value community activation program, in the next couple of slides. So the business case template section really is designed to create a perspective and view for the different actors that may be participating in the implementation of UNTP. And so from a business case template perspective, we sort of think about how each of them might support what the business case for the different types of organizations might be as they look at this. So if I go to the UNTP site, I can see the audience benefits and goals and look at the business case. We can see the business case for different components as we kind of look through here. And in the stakeholder motivation section, we can kind of see how the value proposition, and we're sort of building out additional tools to support business cases as folks adopt UNTP. And the final one is the community activation program. What we see is that communities typically go on a journey of implementing UNTP from inception to discovery to alpha, beta, and live. And the community activation program is really designed to help industry associations, community groups, regulators help drive adoption of UNTP for the benefit of their entire member base. And so the key idea here is when you're implementing a protocol, it's valuable when multiple people are also implementing the protocol. So if one person implements an interoperability protocol and there's not somebody else to receive the information of their implementation, there's no value. And so the value of the protocol goes up as more members, more businesses and implementers implement the protocol. And so the community activation program is helping member associations and industry groups implement the protocol for the benefit of their members. And so the inception and discovery and alpha phases are all about building the business case for their members for implementation. And those are kind of the business frames from the protocol, the components of the protocol that meet sort of the valuation, the value of the data and the value of implementing the protocol. I'm now going to move on to the policy section. The policy section is bringing it back to the policy recommendations, which are recommendation 49. And as I said at the beginning, UNC Act recommendation number 49, transparency at scale, fostering sustainable value chains, was approved at the plenary last month by consensus from all of the national delegates who attended in July. And the actual recommendations to nations, the four recommendations in recommendation 49 is that nations should develop a national policy for transparency at scale. Nations should implement supporting instruments for the national policy. They should develop government support services in support of the national policy to reinforce the goals of delivering transparency at scale. And they should promote the uptake of the national policy for transparency at scale. We did have a whole session a couple of weeks ago about Rec 49, where we went into more detail about all of the components of the recommendation to nations.
Just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We appreciate everyone's time and engagement. We hope everyone found the session valuable and encourage everyone to stay connected with us and our community at chat.pix.io. In 2 weeks, we'll be meeting again. That's September 9th for most of the world and September 10th for our Australian friends, where we'll talk about why right now is actually the best time to start your work and journey into trust architecture. Until then, thanks to everyone for your commitment to building trust and transparency in the supply chain.